All right, everyone. Welcome to the plot holes, where a couple of jackasses stretch credulity and mock artistic vision to tell you what's wrong with multi-million-dollar movies, most of which are older than our target demographic. I'm Dirty Invincible,
And I'm Macron, and
and we're
we're
the plot holes.
eventually we'll get this right, but we are the plot holes, right? That's what we are.
We're the plot holes.
We're the plot holes.
All right, Macron. What are we tearing apart today?
Maybe we should count into that. Sorry, just keep leaning back into that. Today, today we're working on just a classic sci-fi fantasy movie from our childhood, uh, Flight of the Navigator. This is from 1986. Um, Start out with a little plot summary here for those that may not remember clearly or know. Movie starts off in 1978. We start with a young boy named David, played by Joey Kramer, who lives with his parents and younger brother in Florida. Um, One day, his mom sends him to pick up his little brother from a friend's house, and in order to get there, he has to go through some woods. He gets a little distracted and he ends up falling in a ravine, hitting his head and knocking himself unconscious. When he wakes up, his brother's nowhere to be found. He heads back to his house, but there finds that there's a couple of elderly strangers in his house, and the house looks different. Like it's the same house, but the plants are different, and his room isn't his room
Wallpaper.
anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, wallpaper. Again, elderly couple, not normally there. Once the elderly couple realize he's a missing child, they call police, uh, uh, and the cops come and get him. And looking up his name in the database, they find out, oh, he's a missing kid from 1978. And go through a series of events where they explain to him essentially that it's 1986 now. They take him to his parents, who are visibly older now than they were at the very beginning of the movie, and living in a completely different house. Um, Seeing all of this and realizing that he really did time travel, he kind of David kind of passes out. He ends up waking up back at the hospital, or back at the hospital. Ends up waking up at the hospital. Um, and while this is happening, somewhere else in Florida, uh, NASA security's called to take a look at a floating alien ship that has crashed into a power substation of some kind. Um, Dr. Faraday, played by Howard Hessman, investigates and arranges to have the ship taken back to NASA HQ. They find out that it floats, so they can just push it. So they just push it up onto a truck. Uh, Back at the hospital, David, after he comes to, he meets the older version of his brother that really convinces him now that he has been missing for 8 years. He's been gone for 8 years. Though David, there's no physical difference to David. David's the same age. It looks the same. To him, only an hour passed, and but apparently it's been 8 years. After some testing at the hospital, David's brain scans print out this pattern that looks somewhat like a wireframe version of the ship that NASA scientists collected. Um, and somehow this information gets to NASA, and Dr. Faraday uh, goes out to the hospital to convince David to come with him so that they can study him and kind of use him to get help with the ship, essentially. So at NASA, a series of tests reveals that David has more in his brain than anyone else realized, or even he realizes. Dr. Faraday quickly comes to the conclusion that David went on an intergalactic trip in the ship that they found over the past 8 years to an uncharted planet called Phalon. Uh, Traveling faster than the speed of light means that the trip only took David about 4 hours, while everyone on Earth aged about 8 years. Um, Oh, I totally missed the. I'm sorry, I totally skipped over stuff I was supposed to talk about. So, yeah, while at NASA, before the brain scanning, he meets Carolyn, who's played by Sarah Jessica Parker. One of two meetings before he breaks out, by the way. So they make fast friends very quickly. Uh, and the robot named Ralph that she uses to deliver mail, food, and various other stuff to NASA HQ. So the second meeting, the second time she meets David after the brain scans, David kind of realizes that, hey, this is NASA's a little too interested in me, and explains it'll be over in because they're only keeping me here for 48 hours. And Carolyn actually says, well, wait, I actually have seen stuff that says that you're staying here longer than that. And so David kind of freaks out, uh, and he asks her to get a message out to his parents. Then a short while later, while he's resting, he starts hearing this voice calling to him. Ralph shows up and opens up, and the voice tells him to get into Ralph. Um, and Ralph takes him all the way across NASA HQ to the ship, right into the room with the ship in it. And as soon as David gets out of Ralph, a door in the ship opens up, and David climbs aboard and meets Max, who is the ship, played by Paul Rubens. He
Yeah,
learns.
I know you are,
Yeah.
but what am I?
Also known as Pee Wee Herman professionally. So once aboard Max explains that the ship lost all navigation data in the crash at the power substation, and they need him. The ship needs him because he has a copy of all the navigation data saved in his brain in an experimental brain data transfer that has never been done before again. Um, David and Max leave the NASA facility. They're tracked by NASA scientists, and they have a series of conversations as they try to figure out what they're going to do to help each other out and figure out how to get Max home and get David back with his parents and away from the NASA jerks. Um, Max explains to David that he was sent to collect and study various species, and that he would normally take the specimens back in time to the time he collected them. But he couldn't do this for David because the human body's too fragile to survive time travel. Um, so Max explains that he can take the navigation data out of David's brain. He can copy the navigation data out of David's brain uh, with a brain scan that he can do there on the ship. So they set that up, and he does it. But he also seems to copy over some of David's personality, which apparently is also very Pee Wee Herman-esque, turning the ship into Pee Wee Herman for the last like 10 minutes. Um, uh, David basically asks Max to take him back to his family, and they go on a little adventure getting around to get to his family. But by the time they get to his family, NASA's already there waiting at his family's house. And David kind of comes to the realization that NASA won't leave him alone here, so he's going to be studied for the rest of his life, he believes, and he kind of that makes him upset, and so he explains to Max that he wants to try going back in time to his real time because that's where he feels like that's where his home is, not here. Um, so Max agrees to take him back in time, though with caveat that he doesn't know what will happen to David's body, essentially. But they travel through time, and David survives, and he wakes up in the ravine where he was when he got knocked out initially. Uh, David rushes back home. We can see that, hey, look, the plants look normal again. And as he's like getting ready to go through the door, his dad calls to him, and it's his younger version of his dad again, and the younger version of his brother sitting in the boat with the younger version of his mom, and they all go jump in the boat and go set off fireworks. And the only little difference at the end there is that David has kept one of the creatures Max uh, that Max was studying. So it's okay though because he doesn't have a home, right? I believe that's why
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
okay, right? Because the
Right.
Max
He's an orphan.
verified that the planet got blown up by a meteor, so it's okay. You can take this one. It's okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So why did we pick this one, Macron?
I I three basic parts for me is it's a childhood classic. Three basic parts which are gonna step on each other a little bit here. Childhood classic. Uh, it's science fiction fantasy, which I feel is like right up our alley for the kind of stuff we want to talk about in general. And so many parts of this movie are like affected my childhood in some way. So this is really like this is like Hackers, but at a younger age for me.
for sure. Yeah, for me, I mean, it's definitely lighter subject matter than we've been covering, so it's kind of very welcome. Like I said, nostalgia. I quote Max to this day. Some of my favorite ones are like "Sit down, Navigator," and I do not leak, you leak. Remember? And I think the one I say a lot is compliance.
So I want to point out too,
Um,
though, that so compliance, the way he says it, compliance, it makes
compliance.
me think of for some reason, it makes me think of the general from Star Fox. Like when
Okay.
he says goodbye, like I for some reason I thought compliance was from Star Fox for the longest time until I just watched the movie again just this week.
Yeah. Well, then of course there's all the Pee Wee quotes. I actually I saw this before I even know who Pee Wee was. So for me, like when I do those Pee Wee quotes, like I know you are, but what am I? I am quoting Pee Wee, but I'm quoting Max, who's quoting Pee Wee, who's played by Pee Wee. So it all just fits.
Which there's some interesting stuff to
um,
touch on there. We'll get to that later, but in the trivia. But
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I love the puppetry, the I alien, the Puck Marin that you mentioned before. That's the creature that he takes back with him in the past. It reminds me of Babu Frick from
yeah.
episode 9, or rather, I should say Babu
Babu
Frick
Frick reminds you of the
reminds me of the Puck Marin. Let me put that in proper chronological order here. You can see the strings in one of the shot. It's kind of cool. Like they did a lot of even though there's CGI in here, there's a lot of practical effects as well.
well, I think
So it's
like well,
kind
we'll
of
talk
fun.
about it too. But the ship itself was a giant puppet too, right? Like the arm had there was a bunch of places they could put the arm in the ship.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that
yeah,
yeah, it was crazy.
yeah. And it we chose it at the same time we decided to cover the creator. It, but no, even though it was not intentional, like after that mess, it was definitely a welcome palate cleanser. I looked forward to this one after having gone through the creator. I was like, man, this one's gonna be great because it's again nostalgia. I would love. It was one of those movies. I think you mentioned it too. Like we've watched this a bunch of times,
Yeah,
both in our childhood and even throughout. Like maybe not as much as my adult life, but I think it's one of those that I think still holds up for the most part. Aside from the CGI, which is understandably old, and I kind of you can excuse that and kind of
well, and
look past it, kind of like
and it's and it's not used so extensively, right? Like it's there and it's
yeah,
in some big shots, but it's not like the
yeah.
entire movie is centered around this bad CGI, right?
It's not jarring. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's like not like an entire scene isn't a whole composite where they're well, except for the Tokyo one. That one's a
Yeah.
really bad composite shot, but most of the other composite shots are they're very minimal. They use very minimal parts of it, so it looks really good because of
Yeah.
that, and it aged because a lot of those effects aged fairly well, and because the minimal use of CGI, I feel like even back when it first came out the whole like liquid doors turning into the steps thing, even that was kind of like,
Oh yeah.
um,
Like
uh,
mind blowing.
well, it was mind blowing, but I think it wasn't very long after that where I was like, okay, it became dated pretty fast
Yeah.
because of the quality of the CGI. But even then, it's not bad.
Oh
You can
yeah,
just
yeah.
tell like, oh, this is older CGI. That's all.
I feel
It's not
like
like, oh man, this is totally ruining the scene. I hate it. It's nothing like that at all.
yeah.
Luckily.
I feel like this movie, to kind of touch back on a couple of these things here, I feel like this movie, uh, it, as a counter to the creator, it's a short movie that takes itself just serious enough that it's interesting, but not serious enough that everything seems like everything dumb about it seems like a big problem. And then, visually, it's still visually functional. It's not. I was gonna
Yeah.
say appealing, but it's still visually functional. It's not like I feel like it's not like a movie like Willow, where Willow, after the Blu-ray upres, the scan that they did, you could see the visual effects, the matting being
Yeah.
so off for the visual effects. Whereas in this one, it's reasonably good, and you probably like effects wise, you'd probably guess that it wasn't an '80s. I wouldn't have guessed it was like an '80s movie if I didn't know it was an '80s movie. I would have figured an early '90s movie because you got Terminator 2 was in what 91, 92. So like,
Yeah,
and that and I mean this one had pretty good reflection effects like this, and it's one of the
very
first
good.
movies that
Yeah.
did that. So we'll talk more about that later. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of touch back on those things, reasons why we picked this, because it's for how much we're gonna pick this apart. It's
Oh
a
yeah,
good
I got a
movie.
lot to say about it, but it's a good movie. Like
I
I
would
do have a lot to say
I would
about it, but
recommend this over
okay,
The Creator. I would say that.
100%,
Yeah.
100%. I'd watch it again
All right.
because I have.
Now let's move on to the whole fodder. The
The meat and potatoes.
let's talk about this, Jason. Let's get this going. Dirty. Let's get this going.
All right, I think very early on in the movie, the first thing that kind of caught me off guard was so David's in the woods. He's on his way to pick up his little brother Jeff, and he's calling out to Jeff. And one of the times he calls out to Jack because he's like, "Jeff, is that you, Jeff?" And then one time he's like, "Jack, it better not be you." And I'm like, okay, maybe there is someone else, but we haven't been introduced to any other character named Jack. Like his friend's house is like Billy that
Yeah.
Jeff goes to. Jeff goes to Billy's house. So who the hell is Jack? And I don't, it's more of a goof than a plot hole, but it's it definitely was like what did they not check the script here? What was going on?
Which
Um,
doesn't bode well for like you feel like it makes it feel like it's a lot looser than it ends up being, but
yeah.
luckily it's not those kinds of mistakes all the way through, right?
Yeah, I mean that was like really the only one I saw where it was kind of a goof and not really a plot hole.
Yeah.
But it kind of was like, wait, well, hold on. I had to actually like rewind to like make sure I wasn't tripping. But yeah, the next one, still early on in the movie. This is after he wakes up and he goes to the police office, and then they take him over to his parents' house. And it's such a weird way to do that. And it's weird because like maybe phone the parents ahead. Like this is the '80s. They had phones in the '80s. People had phones back then. They knew they worked. You can
Yeah, but
call.
it's
They
also
weren't
Fourth of
mobile phones.
July. It's also Fourth of July, and it's not patriotic to call people when fireworks should be going off, right?
That's okay. That's true. I will give them that. But still, like your missing kid showed up. Let's. I would think
I don't know.
I'd.
Maybe reach out, say something.
Yeah, and it's like I don't know. Maybe they did try, and the parents didn't pick up. Maybe they were celebrating fireworks, and like, oh, okay, they didn't pick up. Let's drive over there. But I felt like a gentle heads up would have avoided that whole intense shock on both ends, especially because like David passes out because of the shock. It's
Yeah,
like,
right.
did they not explain to him that like, hey, it's 8 years later, your parents look older, don't freak
That's what
out.
I do love the fact that they're very much like it's very implied. They're questioning him. They're asking him a bunch of questions about like, oh well, who's the president is one of the things, and he even responds with a smart ass remark to that. But like, they're asking him
Yeah,
all these questions that I feel like they're implying through what they're saying to him that like, hey, this is you woke up in a different time. Uh, and, but they don't say anything directly to him about it, and they're just kind of like, oh, we'll give him to his parents, and then we don't even have to think about this.
right. And then like he gets in shock, and he's like kind of coming out of it in the hospital as they're rushing him to a bed, and he's like asking his parents like uh why are those people in our house, and they're like, we don't know all the answers to this yet, David. And it's like, well, except in this instance you do know why those people are in your house. How hard is it to go like, oh yeah, we sold it and moved to a new house, David? Like it's just that bothered me so much. Like really. Like I get like there's a lot of other unexplained stuff. Like yeah, we don't know the whole time travel, obviously.
Yeah,
But that's a pretty simple question. Why are those people in our house? I, we don't have the answers, David.
we don't have the
we
answers. We
don't.
don't know.
We don't.
No one
We don't know all
knows.
the answers to this yet. But yeah, and then
So,
you brought this one up in the intro a bit, right?
oh yeah, them them taking the UFO. NASA is like, First off, I want to say about that scene, like, there's a lot of NASA incompetence stuff we'll get to here in a moment, but like, for this scene in particular, where they call NASA security in to to come and look at this ship that crashed into a power station. And first off, the security guard, they're like, "How are we gonna get this thing out there?" And the security guard's like, "Oh, just look at it, it just floats." And then he reaches over and
Yeah,
touches it.
he just pushes it. Yeah.
And I'm like, the fact that they're letting him anywhere near this thing after all of this, like after finding this thing in the first place, like I just it just boggles the mind. But then yeah, then they're just like, oh, let's get one of our NASA flatbeds and we'll just push it up onto the flatbed and we'll chain it down. We'll put a tarp over it and drive it through town. Take it to NASA HQ, which I don't. Do they ever say where the NASA like
Which facility
headquarters
it
is?
was?
Yeah, which facility it
No.
was? Because they're in Fort
It,
Lauderdale. That's
it
the town that David's family's in.
that Davidson, yeah, and then but Cape Canaveral is definitely on the map. Like it shows later when they're zooming out of the atmosphere.
Okay.
I think there's a blip that shows that they're at Cape Canaveral. So I think there's that. So they're definitely at Cape Canaveral. But yeah, I think one other thing about you mentioned the guard, and I thought it was great because at first they were playing it that like they knew that what this was, right, and they were like trying to play it cool with the guard. But then they ask him like, or they ask each other like, how do they move it? And that guard is like, yo, watch this, and it's like you said, like, yeah, why aren't they, why don't they have more guards around this guy trying to keep him like quiet or something? But also just like at first they started so good playing like they knew what was going on, but then we're like, how do we move it in front of the guard? Like,
Right?
way to blow your cover there, guys. Like,
They're like, yeah, like, oh, we have all the expertise to deal with this. How do we move
how do we
something like
move
this?
it?
Do we have a
Because at first they're
large
like, oh
ship
yeah,
crane?
we know what this is. This is our thing. You know, we're here to pick it up.
Yeah, yeah,
Don't mind us.
they're trying to like hand wave it.
You know, yeah. And then immediately just discredit themselves. Like, what? How? What? But yeah,
So I mean, and so like to add to the ridiculousness of like some of the things that happen like that though, like that scene in the hospital with the where they're scanning David's brain, right? That's like I feel like there's a lot of people standing in the room that may or at least one person in the room probably should understand something about how this brain scanning machine works, right?
yeah. There's a
And
lot of stuff going on there, and like to kind of go over it, like there's a few scientists in here. Like scientist one goes, he's transmitting in alpha waves with complex frequency patterns in them, and his dad goes, "What's happening?" And then scientist two immediately goes, "I don't know." Like what? Okay, and then scientist one is like, okay, the alpha waves are coming in at 12.78 cycles per second, and I kind of looked up like alpha waves and their range, and that's actually like just above the threshold of what alpha waves normally look at. So I don't know. I wouldn't really, as a layman, I wouldn't think that that's out of the ordinary. Like it's 12.7, but
look, we're not
maybe it
alpha
is
wave
fully
specialists
anomalous.
here. We're just
I'm not
saying
an alpha
that
wave specialist.
based on what we
Yeah,
can find in Google, that does
based
seem
on
like a high alpha wave
Wikipedia
number.
science. Yeah, well, it goes like between like 3 and 12. So like
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
okay, 12.78 would be high, but that's like saying, okay, I've got a slight fever. Like it doesn't
Yeah,
seem like that'd be
yeah.
that crazy and out of the.
Like my temperature is
But
normally between
apparently it's
97.7 and 98.3, and I have a fever of 98.9.
apparently it's enough that it allows them to communicate directly to the computer a binary code,
All right,
or to
that's what
another
we.
scientist that comes in. And then scientist two, who still doesn't know anything about how any of this works, goes, "How the hell is he doing that?" And then finally, scientist three goes, "I have no idea." So now no one knows how it works.
But I
And
love
then
how Scientist 3 is so sure that he is communicating directly with the computer in binary code.
how is he doing that? I have no idea.
I
But
don't
how,
know.
okay, how do you know that?
How are you even monitoring this? What's the. Where's
Well, then
your brain,
what's great
your
is that
alpha wave to binary translator?
what's great is like all this is going on. That UFO wireframe shows up on the screen, right? And the David's dad goes, "Is that coming from David?" And then scientist two, who was just like the guy that was like, "I don't know, how the hell is he doing that? I don't know what my job is." Finally goes like, "I believe it is," like with certainty. His dad's like, "Well, what is it?" And it's like, "Yeah, what is it, guys?" Like,
It's some kind of UFO, but it's directly from David's brain. I know this. I have no idea what happened, but I know that this came from directly from that child's brain.
yeah, yeah,
So I feel like
scientists incompetence.
the hospital scientist incompetence is one thing, but then like you've got like
NASA.
NASA is on a whole nother level, like just nonstop. Like also apparently I had to look this. Apparently Dr. Faraday is supposed to be like the director of NASA, so like the head honcho. Uh, uh, he is just making operational decisions that just do not make sense the whole time. So like they put two guards on everything, so there's always two guards watching David's in his room. Then the ship, there's always two guards sitting like in a room off a ways away from the ship, but they have video monitors on at least. Um, the observation room they put David in was ridiculous. It was just this like it was like a had a really tiny two-way mirror. Like I say tiny. It was, it's a large mirror, but it's like if you're talking about something for observing the room that this kid's supposed to be in, you kind of can't see half the room through the mirror, right? Like it was
Yeah,
small enough. Um, then it also has this like fake Star Trek door, which I just want to point out that like when you're watching the video, it like the frame is like a regular door frame, and so they just jerry rigged this Star Trek door that works only from the back. You can only see it from the back, or it comes in from the back side of the door frame. So you never see anything from it other than
yeah.
the
You
fact that
can't
it
open it
slides
from the
closed,
inside. You can't open
right?
it. It's definitely not a jail. It's definitely not a holding cell. You know, can only open from
But
the outside. No
but at the
controls on the
same
inside.
time, an intern just comes and goes as she pleases with a robot that's large enough to fit this child inside of it.
Yeah, suspiciously large enough to hold a child-sized person inside of it. It's kind of, if you're wondering what this looks like, it's kind of like a gonk-sized mouse droid from Star Wars.
Right? Oh, dude, I didn't even think about that. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It's like if you laid Gonk on his side, but he was shaped like a mouse droid,
yeah, and they gave it some kind of weird face thing.
and it has a mail slot in the front, so it looks like you're just jamming mail into its gob.
Yeah.
I think also was it was that a real robot? Do you think? Like, do you think that was like an actual like a current time robot from 1986 that they just repurposed into the movie?
I don't know. Although I did try to see if like there was an actual Ralph thing at NASA, and the only thing I found online was just that it was a fictional robot.
Oh,
So
okay.
it clearly was made up for a fictional robot from Flight of the Navigator specifically is a lot of the statements I saw made about it. So Ralph was definitely not a NASA thing. And as far as it being like an actual like robot, I don't know. I think it was purpose built for this.
I
From
think this
what
movie
what little I
falls
saw on that.
this movie falls into that time range where it's like you had to put a robot into every movie. So like, I think like
Yeah,
Rocky 3 or 4 also had a robot, and we had like because we're like
K9 and Doctor Who.
K9, yeah, a whole bunch of like robot companions, and so you needed to have like robots to make a movie in the 80s apparently. More NASA incompetence around that though. So when they finally take David in, and first off, like they take David in, they strap him to this computer, and again, the same thing as what happened at the hospital. They have a whole like, oh shit, we don't know what's happening scene where someone accurately describes what's happening every time they're like, I don't know what's going on, and then someone else is like, oh, he's coming from his brain, and it's on the computer. He's answering our questions. Um, I like that the Dr. Faraday uh, basically said, "Oh, it's light speed theory." When it came to like when they realized what the planet was, how far away it was, and what the travel time would have been, he's
Right,
like,
right.
so he calls it light speed theory, where like, oh well, there's time moves slower for him because he was moving closer to the speed of light.
Right.
Which is actually, I mean, it's like his description of it
They
was,
gave a sound explanation. It was
well,
very
they gave a
sound.
sound explanation of, but it's like they could have just said it's special relativity, like, right, like, because
Yeah,
that's
they could have.
a major component of special relativity is the time dilation at relative speeds, right? So like I feel like this is one of
Um.
those scenes where like if this movie
So
was
here's
done
the problem.
today,
I always get the theory of relativity and special relativity always mixed up because one of them has to do with the movement of particles, and one has to do with gravity itself specifically. And so it's kind of, although they're kind of intermingled, I always get those two confused all the time. So
I looked it up.
if you told me, okay,
So
you looked it up, and yeah,
I did look it up, but the yeah, special relativity is what talks about specifically what you're saying there is like the gravity one is general relativity, and the special relativity theory has to do with it has to do with
the particles
the
themselves.
behavior
They're
of
like,
particles as they move closer to the speed of light and the limit of the speed of light, like the constant of speed of light, essentially in a vacuum,
right.
which also ties into general relativity too. But the time dilation specifically is defined in like the description they give is a very accurate description of how special relativity understands uh, time dilation for people moving at different speeds. Um,
Right.
so yeah, so it's like it kills me because I feel like this is one of those instances where if this movie was made today, they would actually use the proper name and they would probably like drop a couple of other references to Einstein because I feel like that also would have been an easy reference to make and then make people think that this, immediately make people go like, "Oh, this is they're talking about real stuff and this is smart."
Right. Yeah, yeah.
Where I feel like back in the 80s it was more like, "Oh, that's nerdy bullshit. Like we should talk about that." Whereas like nowadays it's like, "Oh, this make people kind of connect with the movie more if we drop real factoids and.
We say like it's nerdy bullshit, but then like yeah, they pull up on those car of teenagers that are playing music and they're just rocking out, like enjoying the day, and they're touching grass, and they're like, he's like, Max goes, are those geeks, David? And he goes, yes, Dave, or yes, Max, those are geeks. I'm like, how are they geeks? How they exhibited any geek like behavior aside from like being scared at a UFO hovering behind them and then justifiably driving off in a panic,
To be
like.
fair, to be fair, David's a 12-year-old from the late 70s. So everyone who is not fit his idea of cool is probably a geek, right?
Is
That's
probably a geek. Yeah.
I get your complaint here, but I feel like it was a fair representation of David's view of 80s kids as a late 1970s 12-year-old.
Yep.
Um, some last little bits about NASA before we get after before we get completely off topic again. Some last little bits about NASA incompetence is they they uh they let David just run off when he gets upset at the brain scan. This is what's going on with the brain scan, which that I was just like, okay. They just kind of no one like leaves the room to follow him or anything like that. He just kind of runs off. He ends up back in his room, but it's a very interesting reaction, especially to something where they just realize that they need to study this kid for decades. Um, then, then the scene where they realize that someone has gotten on the ship and they're all going to the ship. Doctor Faraday says, "I want security doubled immediately," and the very first thing I think of is you want to go from 2 guards to 4 guards because that's what caused it. That's what caused this lapse of security was that there was only 2 guards instead of 4 guards. Is that so? I feel like that leads that's their like operational deficiencies. It's
Like,
this
adjust your SOPs to check the insides of the friggin' Ralph robot before you
right.
let it into a secured area, especially one housing an alien UFO.
Well, like, and they're like, "Who's the?" One of the other things they say eventually is like, "Who's the last person to see David?" And someone looks at a log and goes, "Oh, it was what's her name? It was Sarah
It's
Jessica Parker's
Caroline.
character. It was
Yeah,
Caroline." And in my mind, I was like, "Wait, actually, she wasn't the last person to see David because uh,
the last person to
they
see David were the creepy guards staring
the
at
two
him when he was
guards that
changing in his room.
were watching him change in his room, right?" Like,
Yeah,
wouldn't that count as the last people that saw David? Like, you might want to bring those people in too, to explain why they, were totally cool
why
with him just disappearing
why
in a
why a
robot.
Ralph unit came into his room, then he closed the shutters, and then that same Ralph unit is found next to them with the UFO,
Well, and they
and the
watched the
kid's in there.
Ralph
I
unit
wonder how
leave.
that happened. Yeah, they
They
watched
watch
the
the
Ralph
Ralph
unit
unit
leave.
leave, and then no one thinks to like just, and the window's still closed. No one thinks to just go look and see if he's in the room real quick. Like
Yeah,
the only thing these two guards are supposed to do is keep an eye on this kid who's in this room, and they literally see something come and go. Where the kid makes a distraction and they can't see anything, and their first thought is to continue playing cards.
yeah,
Also, I feel like the NASA made a huge mistake if they really wanted to study this kid. He runs away. He's obviously not happy with being at your facility. He runs away. When he's trying to get back to his parents, where he'll be, you show up and make this big display of force before he even lands to
yeah.
scare him away again. And it's like, oh my god, dude,
What do you think was gonna happen?
what? Like what? What was the plan there? Like who
Luckily,
thought?
we go back in time and fix all that, so this whole time branch does not exist anymore.
Right? Thank
Yeah.
God, right? Thank God David's squishy human body survived time travel, so that we don't have to think about this timeline anymore after this.
Yep. This timeline where Sarah Jessica Parker can name tons of Coke varieties, but doesn't know if a Big Mac is still a thing.
You know what? I feel like there were some things that she was talking about that she was being facetious, and then some things that she seemed like she genuinely was like she met this kid twice. Oh, and he says he's from the past. He's missing 8 years of time. Clearly he's being he like clearly he's telling the truth, and she was like poking fun at him for that, kind of in a more serious manner.
Yeah. Yeah. So back to hooking up David to the computers. Yeah. So that whole the shenanigans there. Like first off, like the whole like mind control parts where like he's displaying like he's answering questions like on there. It's like that we don't have that tech yet. Like the mind control that we have with computers is very very limited. Um, Neuralink is one of those companies trying to like push that stuff, and that's kind of a like I wouldn't like that. It's invasive. Like, but even like back in the '90s, in the late '90s, there were quote unquote mind control setups. And I think like there was displays and like fries. I don't know if you ever saw those where like you can go up and it was kind of like the uh the what do you call it? Like the things that you see on exercise machines that have like they read your pulse and your other
Oh
stats
yeah,
and stuff.
like the band. It's like a heart rate monitor. It's like a
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, like you can they're like the metal like bars you can touch.
yeah,
Well, or like excuse me. Like the just like metal handle things, right? And
yeah, yeah.
so like you grab them and you're supposed to be able to like think of I want to turn left or I want to turn right, and like this guy on the screen you control like it was like ski free but mind control ski free, and it was very very finicky. It barely worked and was not a very good demo of the tech that they were putting out there, and that was in the late '90s. And I feel like that level of tech hasn't really advanced past that, except for what they're doing with Neuralink, which is again, it's way too invasive for my taste. I'd rather have something that you get like, yeah, you touch it and it can, through your nerve endings in the various parts of your body, pick up stuff.
Well, and I mean, and I'd like to
Impulses.
point even beyond all of that, like that doesn't seem to be what their initial intentions were, right? Because it was like very, uh, it was kind of, it was like it doesn't seem like what the computer was actually intended to do was read his mind, right? Oh,
Yeah,
sorry, yeah, my internet
yeah.
connection
It
got a little
wasn't. It didn't
janky there.
seem like. Yeah, it didn't seem like it was intended to read his mind. and they were like very surprised about it. Like he overloads the systems. Like
right?
they were clearly like setting up for something, and then but then like they were shocked that all of this happened, but it's like what they were intending. Like why are they shocked
Yeah.
if this was what they
They're shocked
intended?
and then immediately prepared to take advantage of this thing that happened, right?
Yeah, yeah. And it's like, yeah, he's answering questions, and like they're you're kind of wondering like, okay, is he subconsciously answering the questions, or is he merely an interface between the NASA computers and the UFO? You know, whoever is definitely answering the question, even if David doesn't understand the answers he gives consciously. So it's like maybe it's an AI or something that's in his
But I
brain.
feel like the only thing that really points to this actually coming from David is that in the very beginning, the very first question they essentially ask him is his name,
Who's their name? Yeah, yeah,
and he says his name, like his full, it says his full name, and he's still and he's confused by that too, like.
yeah.
So like that makes me think it's his subconscious that's responding to these questions, which is very funny because he's the whole time he's like, I don't know what's going on, and then the computers are going crazy, like answering all these questions that they're asking. And then
Yeah, they're like, okay, where are you at? And he's like, I was at Phalon. And it's like, for note, that's a made up planet, not a real place. I looked it up. Apparently, it's 560 light years away, 2.2 solar hours to get there, is what they say in the movie. And I was looking up some facts, and I think Wikipedia on there, someone did math in the Wikipedia article, and they said it was about 2.1 million times the speed of light. So I don't know if anyone out there in the nerdosphere wants to confirm that in our YouTube comments, but definitely, once we upload this to YouTube, drop that in the comment if you know the actual like calculations there. We can figure it out, but I'm too lazy, and
yeah.
we'd rather see what you have to say on YouTube.
Also,
And
I'm not a
do
math.
you
I
want
don't know about you, but I'm not a math.
I'm not math. Do you want to shout out our
Oh
YouTube and
yeah,
all that?
yeah. We'll put the YouTube. We're at the plot holes at YouTube, but I forget what the thing is. I'll have to remember that I'll have to get that later. I'll put a
YouTube.com
yeah,
at the
YouTube.com
pothole
slash something. I think it's at
at
the
the
plot
potholes.
holes. Is it
Yeah,
at
it's
the
at
plot
the
holes?
potholes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And then also our Twitch channels. Obviously, you're watching this on at Macron on Twitch and at DirtyInvincible on Twitch as well. So yeah, definitely like, subscribe, all that. Follow our Twitch channels. Thank you very
Click the
much.
little
We put
bell
links.
icon to be let know when we got a new video
Yep,
uploaded.
we appreciate all
This is
that
that part
support.
of
Yeah,
the
back.
video where we would put a thing up there that looks like the buttons,
Yep,
but I don't have those yet, so
we
we're good.
point to it and go "pachow,"
Yeah,
quote Uncle
to
Adam.
little Uncle Adam.
Yeah. But yeah. So, anyways, back to the holes. So yeah. Phalon, fake place. It's far away. We're doing speed of light shenanigans that explains why he age why he didn't age even though everyone else did. And so again, that's all plausible, but a lot of it information, like that whole scene about
Well,
how they hooked them up, it's just a big whole in of itself, like how all that is working.
the hilarious thing about it too is like it starts out he's responding in English. Then they start talking about the planet, and then he starts responding in some alien language on the computers.
Yeah, all these
And
glyphs and
then
stuff
and
that
they're
show up.
like, and the NASA, Dr. Faraday's like, well, it could take us decades to figure this out, to like decipher what's in this kid's brain. And then they ask more questions, and it starts responding in English again. And in my head, I'm just like, could we just not ask it the same question just in English and see if it will decipher it
Or
for
ask it, can
us?
you tell us in English?
You just tell us in English what's going on? It gave them most of the information, I assume, because it was they asked about where they went and whatnot, and that's what it was showing. It was Phalon. So I don't know, man. Like it just yeah, it keeps going back and forth between like well, we can get English out of this thing, and like, oh no, it's gonna take decades. This child's entire life, it will take us to decipher this.
Yeah. And then the amount of data, like they're talking about, like, oh, like he's downloading,
He's
and it's like,
downloading.
is he downloading it, or is he uploading it
This is
from
clearly us
himself to the
nitpicking
computer?
here, but this is
We're nerds.
this is a thing that you have to deal with when you do support for people that do
Yep.
websites or anything on the internet. Uh, it's
It's all about
having
perspective, you know.
having to listen to someone call uploading downloading all day long and get confused when you say they were uploading. Um, I think the to go along with NASA's incompetence, varying degrees of incompetence. We also one of the crazy things, and you kind of brought this up about is this the ship communicating through David kind of thing? The powers that are kind of ascribed to the ship are kind of crazy. So we start off with like I don't know some kind of like telepathic link between David and the ship that is kind of slightly there, and then it gets stronger over time. Uh,
Yeah,
you
and the
know,
weird thing is like they use that whole like he's hearing voices thing, and they kind of tease you with that early on when he's not around. You're like, well, who's the ship talking to then? Like,
right? Then we get Max like full on controlling Ralph to break out David. Like not it's not like oh he bugged Ralph and caused him to create a distraction. No, he literally had Ralph drive into the room, open the door, open himself up, get the kid inside, take off, go all the way across NASA HQ, drop David off in the room with the ship. So like, which showed some like crazy advanced wireless like AI takeover of a robot essentially. Um, then when they're on the ship, when David gets on the ship uses a lightning bolt to like hit a panel that opens the hangar door. So he like
yeah,
now he has to use like lightning to kind of trigger switches or buttons or something like that.
yeah.
Um, then he's talking to David. He starts talking to David in languages other than English right off the bat, even though he at least spent a couple hours with David and clearly understands that David knows English. He's the ship starts out with all these different languages, and then on top of that uses English like doesn't seem to have a full command of the English language. Like
Yeah, that's the part that bothers me. It's like, okay, you don't know what promise means, you don't know what privacy means, okay, but you know a word like compliance
yeah,
and navigator, like,
well, and I think and that it gets used to also. I think the very first one he says is do not understand leak, because David says he's gonna go
yeah,
take a leak, and so that one makes sense to
yeah,
me because it's like a kind of a colloquial use of the word leak. It's not the actual definition of the word, but it's he's using it to mean go to the bathroom. So I can kind of feel that one, but yeah, then once he goes into like promise and privacy, I'm like, wait, no, I mean you've been using words much more complex than this.
yeah.
Like this kid had an English dictionary in his brain, like so you should kind of be able to figure out what those words mean if this kid knew what those words mean, right? Like at least like
Yeah. And then the leak one, I mean, at least that also gets justified because it is a setup for a later joke, which is kind of what I quote all the time. When he's talking about having to shove all the data back in, because basically the whole premise, like why he needs David, is because David has the star charts, and Max lost the star charts somehow by running into an electrical power station. That was enough to destroy his databanks apparently, and so David is asking him like, "Oh, so you leaked?" And he goes like, "I do not leak, you leak."
yeah,
It's like, okay, so he understands like the meaning of the word now, and also its usage as going to the bathroom. But it's just
like
the inconsistencies with like his commanded language is kind of throughout the
right.
whole like, movie.
Which I get. I mean, it's a whole thing about like it's that whole
It's
thing
supposed to
where
be a gimmick, right? Like,
yeah, yeah. Well, and you gotta make him seem you gotta make the ship seem kind of alien, but it's still at the same time it
yeah.
just feeds into that same like weirdness of like if you look at this movie critically, which obviously this is just a children's sci-fi fantasy movie,
It's a
but
light-hearted children's movie that we're
right,
picking apart like savages.
but like there's things like the fact that like oh well they show flight affecting David the very first time. So when he breaks out of the hangar, David says, "Oh, take me 20 miles away from here." So he just shoots straight 20 miles straight up into the air. That like it like pushes David down into the seat. You can see him affected by the G forces. However, not
The
realistic
only
it
time that
was.
happens.
But that's the only time that happens. And then immediately after that, so they're in space and he's kind of floating, and then he's like, "Well, take us back." And then the ship drops down at roughly the same speed. But we don't. But David's just sitting comfortably in the chair the whole time. And
Yep.
then anytime they like they did a thing where the ship transforms into a fancier version of itself to do it goes from a TIE fighter to a TIE Advanced uh
Yeah.
to or an
Yes.
interceptor to make faster maneuvers. And so it's flying horizontal, along the ground, and it's making all these quick things. And David makes a comment about the fixing the seat, and these little like cushion things come out and hold them in place, but he's still kind of going side to
Yeah.
side a little bit. But then after
Yeah.
that, any other time they go fast and it's moving around all crazy like their 5 minute trip from Tokyo to San Francisco, did not David's like leaning forward holding on to the command stick things. And it's like, so yeah, just they show it happening to make a joke about it, and then they just completely ignore it for the rest of the movie. Or they never even like, because you could make slight references to it. You don't have to like keep pointing it out every time, obviously, but you could just like make it
Be
obvious that every
consistent about
time.
it.
Yeah, exactly. Just be consistent.
Yeah.
um Also, the ship can do mind transfer, but wasn't prepared to do the mind transfer, but had already done the mind transfer once. But the mind transfer is something that's never been done before in
Yeah,
that
it
order
makes a big
specifically, I
deal
think.
about this. Like David asks, like, how many times has the transfer been done? And Max says none. But clearly, they did one to put the data in his brain in the first place.
I mean, he was explaining it to him in the beginning before they actually took off. Like, that's what
Well, yeah, and
happened.
the
Like,
part that I'm kind of intrigued about is like he says like you will retain all data like after the scan. So does that mean like even all the star chart shit he's gonna retain all that even when he goes back in the past? Like
oh, I didn't even
that's
think
kind of
about that.
implied
Like,
there,
if
you know?
NASA ever finds out, he is screwed. He is screwed because then
Yeah.
they have no ship to do the translation.
Yep.
It's just whatever's locked away in his subconscious. Then they're really going to spend decades trying to figure out what's in his head.
And apparently, transferring those star charts from a 12-year-old's brain turns you into Pee Wee.
Right? Yeah, that's the ultimate takeaway from this movie is that if you read a 12-year-old's 1978 12-year-old's brain who is stuffed to the brim with alien star charts, you will become Pee Wee Herman. Because that was the shift. They did the laugh before that. When he's talking to him and he's asking what laughter is. That was another
Yeah, he
weird one
does.
that he didn't understand.
He does the fake laughter thing. Yeah,
But he does a Pee
and
Wee
there's the
laughter
Pee
in
Wee
that.
laugh. Yeah. Yep.
But then he doesn't do Pee Wee until actually they hit the point where they transferred some. And even then it's like it's just very funny because it's like it's the same. I feel like they did the same thing for that scene that they did when we meet his younger brother Jeff for the first time in 1986, and his brother Jeff, to show that he is now a teenager in the 80s, starts using all these 80s terms. That's radical, yeah. And like it's like just a very what do you call it? Hello, young kids. Hello, kids. Our fellow kids. That's the meme, right? Like,
Yeah.
so they do the same thing here though, where it's like, oh well, now A, he's talking like Pee Wee Herman, and B, he's using all the lingo from, and it is. I was on guard this whole movie, kind of watching for like them to make like temporal mistakes because he's a transplant from the 70s, late 70s, but like they do
Yeah.
really use like stuff that you would know if you were a kid in the 70s, like the way like the Big Mac commercial and Starsky and Hutch and all that stuff. It all lines up properly. Um,
Yeah.
and so does Pee Wee Herman's uh, kid language. Um, I think the other thing the other thing that kind of bothered me a little bit about the ship is right off the bat when after they meet and they're flying away, and he's like kind of the ship is kind of like saying like, oh, that was only a level 1 maneuver, oh, that was only a level 3 maneuver, and like I do way better than that. And then he's like, well, what's a level 1 maneuver? And so the ship starts doing it, but then the ship starts bragging about all this other stuff he can do, I can do a billion calculations a second. I know 900 million languages, and I can travel from here to here. And he's like going on about stuff that
But I
just was
don't know what
not brought
privacy
up.
means.
But I do not
No
know what
promise.
privacy means, or leak, or or promise, or laughter.
What is laughter? I'm gonna laugh like Pee Wee now.
I think this all
Yep.
kind of culminates into this like I feel like there's this kind of running bit throughout the movie where like David acts. I mean, he's a 12-year-old from 1978, so you got to kind of take it from that position. But he just kind of acts, and he's kind of treated like he's dumb or like he couldn't possibly know things. But then he does things that are like he has some like moments where it's like just either weird brilliance or definitely dumb stuff happening. And so
Or
what?
snarky clapbacks, you know.
Yeah, Starkey. Yeah, he's very witty. He's very quick, and he kind of picks up on things. He's very much in the same mode as the ship, where like, yes, if you explain something to him once, he seems to kind of get it, you know. Uh,
Yeah.
so like but like one of the funny things that happened was is when they go to Tokyo, he instantly recognizes this is Tokyo. This is a child that I do not believe has traveled outside of Florida except for his trip to space.
Yeah.
And they go to Tokyo, and he's like, "Hey, this is Tokyo." I'm like, "Wait, where? How did he know that?" They didn't have the internet back in the 78. I
Yeah.
said the internet in the 78. I did. I'm old enough to do that.
Maybe all those Godzilla movies. Who knows?
He also, I think, the other one of the other smart things he does is he realizes at multiple points. So like it could just be him like just kind of being a naysayer or a doomer or something like that. But like at a couple of points, he kind of recognizes that like what's going on with him. NASA's gonna like experiment with him forever. Like they're never gonna let him go. And
Yeah.
it's more than just like an unreasonable kind of way. Like no, he's actually like he's presented with these signs that it's not going well, that he's not going to end up going back home, and he reacts appropriately and like says it out loud to the ship, to Caroline, to other people. So like
Yeah, he's
that's
very well aware of like his situation and what
right.
can happen to him. So
But then
definitely not stupid.
then he brings an alien from another world with him into the past, and
Yeah.
I can't help but think that the ship is dumb, like so dumb. The ship can travel through time and has some understanding of not trying to affect the places where
Well,
it collects specimens from.
it also got turned into Pee Wee, so we do have to take that into account.
Okay, that is a fair comment that I did not anticipate you making, so I can live with that. But I also think that the kid, given the how quickly David recognized his predicament in multiple situations, would also probably recognize that having an alien would put him back in the same boat that he was in the 86.
Yeah,
Where as soon
yeah,
as someone finds out that this kid's got an alien,
and that he's
he's
got a bunch of star charts in his brain.
he's got a bunch of star charts in his brain and an English explanation for the planet he went to back in
Yeah,
1978.
I think the thing that really bothered me with the him bringing the Puck Marin back is
uh,
it um how it's the dog not freaking out. Like we got the reveal, so like you mentioned, like he goes back home, his family's already out on the boat because like their dock is like right over the
yeah,
they're basically
they
right
have
at the
waterfront
beachfront
property. Yeah, yeah,
essentially. They waterfront property. So he just it's a quick jaunt over to the boat, and by the time he got on the boat, the dog would have like smelled the thing, like, and it would have freaked out.
also
And
he just straight up shows his younger brother, who this is like an 8-year old at the time, like an 8-year old that he has an adversarial relationship with.
yeah, he doesn't like okay, in the future, yeah, his brother, got hit with a big dose of reality by his older brother disappearing. And so it's definitely a bit, not only is he literally more mature, but mentally he's also probably been hardened by that experience.
Yeah,
And so that's what David sees from him last in the future is coming back to this kid who he was just having a fight with and who just basically got him knocked out in a ravine. Like now we're buddy
And then
buddy
out of
again.
nowhere too, he's like, he apologizes. Jeff apologizes, which I feel like, I was that was nice. It was heartwarming, but like
It's a family
it's
movie.
like
We got to make it.
what
Yeah.
like what happened between the time that he went into the ravine and the time he got on the boat that made Jeff realize that he should apologize for jumping out and scaring him.
Yeah. And then I do want to, because we're getting kind of towards, this is actually kind of the end of the movie there, but getting towards the end there, one of my favorite scenes is Al's Gator Shack or whatever it was called. And they pull up to this gas station and there's this guy and they're like, oh, that must be Al. And is he doesn't notice them landing. He's doing whatever he's doing. But as soon as David gets out of the ship and asks if he can use the phone, like that's when he notices there's a UFO there, and he just is frozen there like a deer in headlights. It's the best. He's just because he just stays there completely still. And while David is off making this phone call, this family comes up and is like pestering the guy while he's just still like stuck in shock looking at this UFO. And this dad from the family is just like this like BS small talk about like, man, they're that Indian that fake Indian thing looks kind of hokey, but that spaceship looks great. And the kids are sitting there like playing with the stairs and everything, and
Oh
there's like, I
man,
want a photo, I want a photo. And then they David runs back out into the ship and it takes off, and that's when they finally realize like, oh crap, that was like that was actually a thing. And Al finally talks and's like, he said he just wanted the phone home.
that was a that was a great line, and I remember Al. I remember the big guy just being dumbfounded and staring at the ship. I had no memory of the family, the whole interaction with the family, and that was like the best part. One of the best parts of that scene was just the
Yeah.
total nonchalance of the other yuppie dude in taking his family on a trip across Florida, like
Yep.
thinking this was just another roadside attraction until the kid gets in and takes off. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So
that was great.
that's kind of the end of our holes portion. Do you want to lead us off with some of the trivia?
Yeah, let's do some trivia. Let's do some Flight of the Navigator trivia. First off, I was actually kind of surprised because it's got some decent names in it. It's not full of like huge actors, but they're all actors that have been at that point had been in a lot of stuff. But the movie only had a budget of about $9 million, and it took in 18.6 at the box office, which seems pretty good to me. Like surprisingly good to me. Like that a movie that like that would double its budget. But this
That's
is
great.
it's oh what was that?
I say yeah, it's very good. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So, a couple of neat things about this one is that the CGI was done by the director's brother. Randall Kleiser, I think, is the director, and then his brother's name is Jeff. So which is very funny because the brother's name is Jeff in this, which makes me think that's what that came from. Even though it was
Call back. Yeah.
probably totally happenstance, probably had nothing to do with it, but um, his brother Jeff did worked on commercials, did CGI for commercials, which apparently were like trailblazing in the field of CGI at the time. Um, because so they did some things that had already kind of been in commercials, but they made it more of a feature length film kind of thing. So, and one of the things they did was they used this is the first actual use of reflection mapping. So they took the video and they mapped what the reflection would look like on the hull of the ship for all those CGI scenes. And so this is yeah, because this is 1986, and I think the next big breakthrough in that was Terminator 2 with the T1000, and that was in 91 or 92.
Yeah.
Um,
If not that, Abyss.
oh yeah, that's a good point. I don't even
Yeah.
remember when Abyss was, but they did this rendering on this
'89.
supercomputer setup that they had. Oh, okay, so it was like right between those two then. Yeah. So the next one would have been Abyss, that's like 3 years later, 4 years later, right? Because it was '86.
Yeah. Yep.
Um, So so this is like the first time they used that effect had been used in a feature-length movie. It had been used in an advertisement, or a advertisement demo for like Kohler or something like that, showing the reflection in a droplet of water, but never in a feature-length movie like this.
Yeah.
They did the rendering for this on a big supercomputer that they had access to, and the problem was is the supercomputer did not have enough storage to store more than a couple of frames
Yeah, they had
at a
to wipe
time.
it every time.
Yeah,
That's
so
nuts.
they rendered a frame, saved it, recorded it onto film, and then wiped the frame off digitally off the computer's memory. So that to me is the crazy part, especially given how long the rendering probably took for this. Like, because it's there's some pretty long scenes of them doing the CGI. Uh, which for how not invasive it was, it's still it was a surprisingly large amount of it. But then they also, I mean, the other thing to keep in mind is they had two full-size stunt holes for the ship. So like when you see David like leaning out the doorway talking to the kids on the side of the road, that's a real like one that's one of the hulls they built that had like a crane arm in it. Um, they hid a bunch of like the things that would hold the ship model up. um, they had a big crane arm that would go into the back, and then they would put these little standees underneath it that would look like chain that would run up and under the tarp. And so the chains that were actually like holding it looked like it was holding it down were actually kind of also holding it up partly. Um,
That's kind of funny. Yeah, I
but
assume that
most,
that's kind of what they were doing, especially when they were transporting it on the excuse me, on the
yeah.
truck.
Well, and they had a part of it you couldn't see that they kind of either obscured with the shot or they did something else to it. But there's because I think
Probably
both of the
like what they
models
did with the
had a crane
land
arm.
speeder
Yeah,
in
yeah.
like Star Wars. You know, where
Where they
like
did
they
everything they could to just obscure it physically, like mirrors or something
yeah,
like that. But
well then
yeah,
like
that was that.
erased out anything underneath it too. Yeah.
Yeah. So um, so yeah, that was some interesting stuff about the movie. Let's get on to surprise actors here. This is my regular bit now. I'm just gonna keep doing surprise actors, even though none of these people are surprised. I guess I'll start with Paul Rubens was kind of a surprise actually. He's credited as Paul Mall in this movie, which was apparently his idea, was to not let people know who the ship was played by. So they would be surprised. I assume so they would be surprised by the turn at the end where he, gets part of
Well, he
David's
turns into Pee
personality.
Wee. Yeah.
Yeah. um, so obviously we all know Paul Rubens as Pee Wee Herman, and he actually he's done a lot of other stuff, but the that this was actually a like a, I guess this was an early like big non Pee Wee Herman branded something for him.
I think
Um,
my favorite cameo that he made was in Buffy.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
my favorite. I think my favorite Paul Rubens non Pee Wee Herman role is hands down Mystery Men. Like him
I
as
figured you were gonna say Mystery Man.
he was so good in that movie. Just he played the character perfectly and had no problems being a disgusting guy. Like
Yeah.
totally bought into that hook, line, and sinker. Just balls to the wall. Had no qualms about potentially tarnishing his image or anything like that. So I mean, obviously his image had kind of been tarnished by that point, but
Yeah, that's a whole other thing. I mean,
yeah.
yeah.
So the
Out
Dr.
of
Faraday was played by Howard Hessman, who I immediately recognize this guy every time I see him. Never remember
yeah,
his name.
WKRP. Yeah.
He's from WKRP, Dr. Fever, the one of the main guys from WKRP. But he was also Captain Lassard in Police Academy too, and he's been in so many other movies. In fact, I just watched a Clue documentary, and they actually spent a bit of time talking about he had an uncredit. He was the chief of police that showed up at the door at the end of Clue, and I
Yeah.
was like, "Holy crap! I totally didn't remember that." But yeah, every time I
Yeah,
see
neither
him,
did
you
I.
see him,
That's
you
a
would
surprise.
recognize
Yeah,
him, but I never
definitely.
remember his name. So Howard Hessman, great guy. Veronica Cartwright, who is another person. Every time I see her, all I can think of is Alien. But
Yep.
she played Lambert from Alien. Um, and I feel like she gets a lot of FaceTime in Alien for being one of the crew members that that dies pretty quickly, but the like it just her face is just very recognizable to me as
Very,
hey
yeah, yeah,
from Alien.
yep,
Um,
100%. And when I watched this, I saw it's like, oh wow, okay, she's from Alien. Yeah,
right? It's just
100%.
yeah, it's that thing, and I think so. The dad, so she played the mom Helen. The dad, Bill, was played by Cliff DeYoung, who is he's another one of those faces. He's just not as famous, I guess, but you see him in a lot of stuff, and
A lot of stuff. Yeah, you definitely
he's
recognize his
he's
face too.
typecast as the dad, either the dad or the no name henchman, where he's like he'll talk to, he's the one talking to police or something like that for some
Yep.
bigger villain or something, you know. So he was actually he's been in or well I mean he was in a couple of things too where he had kind of a bigger role. So he played Colonel Montgomery in Glory. He was one of the guest actors on the pilot for the X-Files.
Okay.
And he also, I don't know if you know this. Do you remember Carnosaur 2? Not 1, but 2.
I try not to
Carnosaur.
remember the Carnosaur series in general. I
He
didn't
was
watch any of them,
he
and
was Major McQuaid in Carnosaur. I know you've heard of it before though, and I know you've heard of
I
Major
know I've
McQuaid
heard of it. Yep.
because it's so famous. And now it's a
No.
movie that we're gonna have to cover because I did not know it was a
Yeah.
thing. But I just
Yeah.
want to point out it's Carnosaur like Car the vehicle, not Carney like the, meat eater, but like Car the vehicle dinosaur 2 at the end.
Really?
Yeah, it's really spelt like that. Oh my God. So yeah, now we have to put it on the list, and eventually we'll do this one. Then I think the
Anyways,
most the most important one was Sarah Jessica Parker. This was like not her
yep.
first
Yep.
movie role, but it was like one of her bigger early movie roles, I guess. She was in Footloose. Obviously Hocus Pocus and Sex and the City
Yeah.
are two of her other big ones, but yeah, Footloose came before this, but I guess her part wasn't huge in Footloose. I don't recall her in
I
Footloose.
didn't know she was in Footloose, but I mean, this was the
I
first
think
time
she was
I
one
had
of the
ever seen
kids.
her,
Yeah.
and it was one of those things like, yeah, this is like instant childhood crush kind of thing. Like, holy crap, it's Sarah Jessica Parker. Like, of course.
Well, she was cool with her purple hair, and she went out to
Yeah.
concerts and stuff. Yeah.
Doesn't know what a Big Mac is.
So that was our list of surprise actors. All of them a surprise. I know we didn't expect
Now on
Carnosaur 2 to
for
make an appearance this early, but it did.
yeah, and now on to some creature facts. So garpuntals, those come from South Petrolis. Once they bite, they never let go. The Fernastris comes from the Pixar elliptic. Okay. And Puckmarins, we've talked about this guy before. They're from Benpuka Minor. They're not dangerous. They're very ticklish, and their world was destroyed by a comet. And our last one, a zigzag, is kind of like a hippo, but with feathers.
Oh, okay.
And that's it for our creature facts.
Was the Finastris the poop looking one? I always remember the blue
No,
one
that
that's
one,
sick.
yeah, they didn't give a name for that one. Yeah. No,
Oh,
the
that makes me a
Finastris,
little
that was the
sad.
one that it looks like a squid and it's got that big mouth and it's
Oh, yeah,
got
yeah.
the inky stuff coming out. Yeah. Not the I one. That
Not the
one's
I one.
yeah, yeah.
A little too
They
on the
didn't give a name
nose.
for that one either. Yeah.
I didn't mean to make a
Anyway,
pun
so
there, but I did.
yeah, well, I think we've managed to poke enough holes in Fly the Navigator for today. Join us on the next episode. That's going to be 2 weeks from now, not next week, but 2 weeks from now, June 28th at 1 p.m. Pacific time, as usual, where we'll destroy Short Circuit. I'm Dirty Invincible,
And I'm Macron. And
and
we
we're the
are
plot holes.
the Potholes. Eventually, we'll have a little timer tick down thing, and then we'll get it right. And that will
Maybe,
be the day that we will have millions of viewers, and everything will be right
yeah,
with the world.
yeah.
All right, guys, thanks. Have a good one.
Compliance.